There are places we're all supposed to feel safe. Our homes, our cars, the public spaces we move through every day. The stories you're about to hear are about the moments when that safety was shattered, often by the people we least expect. These are real accounts of when the ordinary world showed its dark and dangerous side. This is the first story. I was 39 years old, a wife and a mother to 3 wonderful daughters. My family needed a little extra income at the time, so I took a job working the overnight shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. at a gas station and convenience store in our town, a suburb just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. It was a predominantly safe area, and the company didn't think it was necessary to have a second person on the night shift because it was usually pretty slow. My duties were simple: run the cash register, stock the shelves, clean the store, and read as many Dean Koontz novels as I could to pass the long, quiet hours. I did all of this completely by myself. I had been working there for about a year and had gotten used to the rhythm of the night. I had my regulars, the pizza delivery guys, the EMTs on their break, the local cops who would stop in for free coffee. I'd also had my share of strange encounters with people high on meth or homeless folks looking for a handout, but nothing I couldn't handle. I was a pro at this job. On this particular night, I was deep into a Dean Koontz novel called Intensity, a fitting title for what was about to happen. I put my bookmark in the page and decided to get up and move around. I went over to the display of 5-hour energy shots near the counter and started organizing them, getting ready to restock. I heard the familiar jingle of the bell above the door. I assumed it was just another regular. I was setting down a case of the energy shots, ready to greet the customer, when I felt something cold and hard press firmly against my right shoulder blade. My first thought was that it was one of my regulars playing a cruel joke. I started to turn around to tell him off when I was met with the sight of a gun pointed directly at my forehead. The man holding it was young African American with a red bandana covering the lower half of his face. His eyes were wide and frantic. My entire body went into shock. I immediately threw my hands up in the air. I looked past him and saw 3 other young men, all wearing different colored bandanas, spreading out through the store. They didn't have guns, but they looked just as nervous and were demanding money. The gunman jabbed the pistol into my back and growled, "Hurry up. Give me the money. Open the register." My voice was shaking as I said, yes, of course, here." With my hands still in the air, I walked shakily around the counter, the cold metal of the gun pressed against my head the entire time. I opened the first cash register, and the other 3 descended on it, grabbing all the cash. Then the gunman saw the second register, the one we used for morning shift change, and yelled, "That one too." I quickly put in my code and opened it. They cleaned that one out as well. Then they saw the safe underneath the counter. The gunman pointed his weapon right at my temple and demanded I open the safe. In a panicked, shaky voice, I tried to explain that the safe was on a time lock. You could only get a small amount of money out every 2 minutes. It was designed to prevent exactly this kind of robbery. The guy started frantically pressing the buttons on the safe, getting more and more frustrated as it refused to give them what they wanted. In that moment, I started praying out loud. "Please God, spare me. I have a husband and 3 little girls at home. They need me." I just kept repeating it over and over, my voice getting more frantic. I heard one of the other guys yell, "Somebody shut that woman up." And another one said, "Just shoot her already. We got what we need." At that moment, I was sure I was going to die. I felt a surge of anger mixed with my terror. This was not how my life was supposed to end in a random act of violence at a gas station. I watched as they gave up on the safe and started grabbing cartons of cigarettes and boxes of cigars, anything they could carry. One of them yelled, "We've been here too long. Let's go." 3 of them sprinted out the door. The gunman was the last to leave. As he backed away from me, his bandana slipped down, and for a split second, I saw his face. He was just a kid, maybe 16 or 17. He looked as scared as I was. He gave me a strange, almost apologetic look, then turned and ran. At the exact same moment, a woman walked into the store to buy a soda. The robbers yelled at her, pointing the gun at her and demanding her purse. Incredibly, the woman stood her ground and yelled back, "I'm not giving you my purse." I thought for sure they would shoot her, but they were in too much of a hurry. They just ran out the door and scattered into the night. I looked at the woman, then at the glass door. I could see her partner waiting in a truck outside. I told her to go to her truck while I called the police. As soon as she was safely outside, I locked the doors, grabbed the store's landline, and dialed 911. I then ran into the stockroom and locked that door as well, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I gave my statement to the police and then to the CSI investigators who arrived later. I had to watch the security footage of myself at gunpoint 3 separate times. It was surreal. My manager eventually showed up. I overheard her on the phone with her boss, the district manager, who told her, "Oh, she'll be fine. No need for me to get out of bed for this. I lost it." I quit right then and there. I finally got home around 4 a.m. I went upstairs and kissed each of my sleeping daughters on their foreheads. I went into my bedroom, trying not to wake my husband, and just broke down, sobbing in the bathroom. My husband woke up and held me as I explained the whole nightmare. The next day, I called a lawyer. I found out the 4 robbers were all just 16 years old. I don't know what happened to them, but I ended up getting a year of unemployment and a $25,000 settlement from the company for their negligence. It took me a full year of therapy for the PTSD before I could even walk into a gas station by myself again. It's been 4 years now, and I'm doing better, but I never go anywhere without my taser. To start this off, I need to say that I'm a 25-year-old woman now, but this all took place when I was 18, about to turn 19. I met my now ex-boyfriend, let's call him Alex, through some mutual friends just before my 18th birthday. We hit it off really fast, and when I got my first apartment on my own, I gave him a key. He lived nearby, and at the time, it seemed like a smart, convenient idea. Months passed, and my life got incredibly busy. I was working as a waitress at a popular downtown restaurant, and it was the middle of summer. This meant the restaurant was constantly booked for parties and events, so I was pulling a lot of overtime, often working very late nights. I always took the train home from work. One night, I had left my phone in my locker as usual. When I got on the train for the ride home, I pulled it out and my screen lit up. I had 133 missed calls and over 200 text messages, all from him. My heart sank. I tried to call him back immediately, but he didn't answer. I scrolled through the texts, and they were complete gibberish. They were hysterical, panicked messages, as if I had gone missing or something terrible had happened. I always told the people closest to me what my work shifts were, so he knew exactly where I was. When I finally arrived at my apartment building, the sun was already starting to come up. It was that strange, bright light of early summer mornings. I walked into my apartment and saw him sitting on my couch, just staring at the wall. He stood up, looked right through me without saying a word, walked past me, and left. It was one of the oddest and most unsettling things I had ever experienced. I immediately called my best friend to tell her about it. More time passed, and I was now turning 19. Alex and I moved in together, which turned out to be a monumental mistake. After that first strange incident, he had acted completely normal, and we never spoke of it again, no matter how many times I tried to bring it up. Life was okay for a while, but then he got fired from his job. That's when he went completely off the rails. I had already been noticing a lot of red flags in the relationship, and I was secretly planning my exit. I was just waiting for my next paycheck to come in, so I'd have enough money to get my own place. After he lost his job, his drinking spiraled out of control. It got so bad that the day I got paid, he stole over $280 from my savings. I kept my savings in a physical cash box hidden in my closet. When I found out the money was gone and confronted him about it, he lied to my face for days. It wasn't until one of his own friends called me and told me what Alex had done with the money, spent it all in one night at a bar, that he finally admitted it. I was devastated, but I knew I'd never see that money again. That was the last straw. That same day, I broke up with him. When I told him I wanted to end things, he was eerily quiet. He just nodded and went to bed. I was actually relieved that he seemed to be taking it so well. Around that time, I had met a wonderful new man, who for the sake of this story, we'll call Max. Max and I hit it off immediately, and we started spending our weekends together. I was still living in the same apartment as my ex, but I didn't bring up Max to him. Alex was pretty much drunk 24/7 at this point, and he had taken out a heavy loan, claiming it was for a new car, but I knew it was just to fund his drinking habit. I had kept a physical diary in my nightstand drawer. I never left it out. But one day, I came home from work to a string of angry texts. He had gone through my things, found my diary, and was now accusing me of cheating on him, which wasn't even true since we had been broken up for a while. Things escalated from there to the point where I couldn't even be in the apartment anymore. Max, thankfully, let me stay with him until I could find a new place. One evening, Max and I were driving back to his place from the grocery store when my ex called me. He said he had forgotten his keys and was locked out, and asked if I could come open the door for him. I agreed, since we were nearby. He specifically told me not to bring Max. I went into the apartment, opened the door, and made a small joke about him forgetting his keys. I used the opportunity to grab a few more of my personal belongings. When I was about to leave the bedroom, Alex stood in the doorway, blocking my path. He demanded that I stay with him and give him my set of keys. I still had my keys because all of my furniture and most of my belongings were still there, and my family and I were planning to move everything out the following week. I said no and told him I was leaving. He wouldn't move. He just stood there, blocking me. Then, he punched me in the face. I was stunned. I immediately called Max. For context, my ex was about 5'7" and very slim. Max is 6'3" and built like a football player. The sound of Max's deep voice on the phone spooked my ex a bit, but not enough for him to get out of my way. My face was throbbing, but I knew I had to get out of there right now. While still on the phone with Max, I told my ex no, again, and pushed him roughly out of the way, just enough to squeeze past him. As I was at the front door, fumbling with the lock to get out, I saw him out of the corner of my eye. He was walking towards me from the kitchen, and he was holding a kitchen knife. I don't think I've ever been so afraid in my entire life. I ripped the door open, slammed it shut behind me, and ran down the stairs to Max's car. I jumped in, told him to drive, and explained what had just happened. Max was horrified and told me to call my mom, which I did. She knew things were bad, but this new development terrified her. The week leading up to moving day was hell. He called and texted me nonstop. At one point, he called me over 20 times in a single day and sent me pictures of him cutting his wrists, blaming me for it. When moving day finally came, he was completely unhinged. Max came along to help my family, which included my mom, stepdad, and older brother. Max stayed downstairs as a precaution, but that wasn't enough. My ex went ballistic, screaming and threatening to kill me in front of my entire family. Luckily, nothing physical happened, and we got all of my stuff out of there. But the harassment didn't stop. He had some of his friends stalk me at my job. I know this because I recognized one of them and confronted him, and he admitted that Alex had sent him. I confronted Alex about it, and he denied everything, but the constant messages and calls continued until I finally blocked his number. I wish that was the end of it. Max and I later moved in together when I was about 21. We had been dating for almost 2 years. By this point, we had moved a significant distance away from my ex, but somehow, he found out where we lived. He started sending his friends to knock on our door in the middle of the night. He sent anonymous death threats to our mailbox. This went on for months. One night, we came home from a date, and our dog, who was just a puppy then, was barking like crazy at the window. We just figured she saw a squirrel or a cat and went to bed. Around 2:30 in the morning, we woke up to the dog barking again. This time, she was standing at our bedroom door, barking into the dark living room. We always kept our bedroom door slightly ajar. I woke up Max. He got up to see what was wrong, and I stood up in bed to look over his shoulder. Suddenly, Max yelled, "What the hell are you doing in our house?" And then I heard it. Footsteps running fast across the living room floor. Max slammed our bedroom door shut and screamed at me to call 911. The police arrived in about 10 minutes. We heard a commotion outside our apartment door, and then an officer asked us to open it. When we did, I saw a face I had prayed I would never see again. It was him, my ex. At the police station, they told us he had pried open one of our windows. We lived on the first floor. He had hidden in our house and waited for us to come home and go to sleep. The scariest part was what they found on him. He had a hunting knife, a roll of duct tape, and a small handsaw. He was arrested that day and sentenced to 2 years in prison for breaking and entering. Our country's sentencing system is a joke. I got a restraining order against him, and Max and I moved even further away. This story does have a happy ending, though. Max and I got married last year, and just 2 months ago, I gave birth to our beautiful daughter. We live in a small, quiet town, far away from all of that, and I truly hope I never have to see his sorry face ever again. I'm 18 now, and my sister, Emily, is 21. A couple of years ago, we decided on a whim to take a weekend road trip from our home in Phoenix, Arizona, up to Colorado to see the mountains. The plan was simple. As soon as I got off my long shift at work, we hit the road. I had worked from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. that day, so by the time we packed the car and started driving, I was already exhausted. But my sister has never been comfortable driving at night, especially on unfamiliar highways, so I told her I would handle the first leg of the drive. The drive from Phoenix north through Arizona is long and dark, a lot of empty desert highway. We decided to take the back roads through some of the smaller towns, thinking it would be more scenic and also easier for me to find a place to pull over and sleep when I inevitably got too tired to continue. Around 3 hours into the drive, somewhere in the high country of northern Arizona, the exhaustion hit me like a wall. My eyelids felt like they had weights on them. I told Emily I had to pull over. We started looking for a truck stop or a well-lit rest area, somewhere that felt relatively safe for 2 young women to be sleeping in a car. We soon came upon a small, isolated truck stop. It looked old and run down. Half the lights in the parking lot were out, and the main building looked like it might have been abandoned. It had a deserted, creepy feel to it, but I was so tired I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. I figured it was better than falling asleep at the wheel. One of the windows in my compact car was broken and stuck slightly open, which made me feel even more vulnerable. My sister, sensing my unease, said she would stay awake and keep watch while I took a quick nap. I leaned my driver's seat back, got as comfortable as I could, and drifted off almost immediately. I don't know how long I was asleep, maybe only 20 minutes, but I was shaken awake by Emily. Her voice was a terrified whisper. "Sophie, we have to go. We have to leave right now." I sat up, disoriented and confused, and asked her what was wrong. My heart sank as she pointed to a dark-colored sedan parked about 15 feet away from us, next to a gas pump. She explained that the car had pulled in a few minutes after I had fallen asleep. They parked, turned off their engine, but never turned off their headlights, which were pointed directly at our car. No one ever got out. They just sat there in the dark, staring at us. The entire time I was asleep, someone in that car was just watching. My exhaustion vanished, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. I started the car without a second thought. As I was putting it in drive, Emily told me the rest. The car had heavily tinted windows, so she couldn't see who was inside or how many people there were. They just sat there, perfectly still, for the whole 20 minutes. The second I pulled out of the parking spot and started driving away from the truck stop, their car's engine roared to life. They started following us, keeping a steady distance behind, but they didn't turn on their headlights. They were following us in the pitch-black darkness. My heart was pounding in my chest. I sped up, my eyes darting between the dark road ahead and the faint outline of the car in my rearview mirror. We needed to find somewhere public, somewhere with lights and people. After a few terrifying minutes that felt like an eternity, we saw the bright lights of a 24-hour convenience store and gas station up ahead. It looked busy, with several cars and a couple of big rigs in the parking lot. I swerved into the parking lot without even signaling and parked right in front of the main entrance, under the brightest light I could find. This seemed to spook the driver of the other car. They didn't follow us into the lot. They just drove straight past, their car a dark shadow disappearing into the night. We never saw them again. We sat there in that parking lot for almost an hour, too scared to move, waiting for our hearts to stop racing. To this day, I have no idea what those people wanted or what would have happened if my sister hadn't been awake. It was probably the most terrifying experience of my life, and a stark reminder of how vulnerable you can be out on the road, all alone in the dark. This happened back in the summer of 2018. It was around 4:30 in the afternoon on a bright, sunny Friday. I was heading into the city to hang out with some friends, something I did most weekends. My dad dropped me off at our local train station, and I started walking towards the platform. As I got closer, I noticed a large number of people just standing around outside the station building. That was usually a bad sign. It almost always meant a train was canceled, and that we'd have to wait for a replacement bus service, which was always a nightmare. Just to be sure, I walked into the station and onto the start of the platform, heading towards the middle where the main information boards were. I looked both ways. The platforms on both sides were completely empty of trains, which was really unusual for that time of day on a Friday. I can't remember exactly what the information board said, but I know they didn't give any clear reason for the situation. There were no announcements about delays or cancellations. Confused, I walked back outside to where everyone else was standing. People were looking around, muttering to each other, all trying to figure out what was going on. It was then that the police cars started to arrive. First one, then another, until there were at least 5 of them, their lights flashing silently. 2 or 3 ambulances pulled up right behind them. I saw a middle-aged woman talking to a police officer near the entrance. She looked pale and was visibly shaken, her hands trembling. I couldn't hear everything she was saying, but I distinctly heard her voice crack as she said, "I really don't know how to explain it. He just jumped right in front of it." My stomach dropped. I started to realize what must have happened. Someone had jumped in front of a train. I had probably arrived only a minute or 2 after it had happened. I finally worked up the courage to ask a couple of teenagers standing nearby, "Hey, do you guys know what happened?" One of them looked at me with wide eyes and confirmed my fear. "Yeah, man," he said. "Some guy jumped." A little while later, what looked like detectives showed up. They were dressed in dark suits and were carrying folders and paperwork. One of them had a camera and was taking photographs of the train tracks, right in the area where I had just walked past moments before. I realized with a jolt of horror that I had unknowingly walked right past what must have been a gruesome scene, right past the spot where a person's body lay after being hit by a train. I'm honestly shocked that none of the station staff stopped me from walking onto the platform. I never saw anything about the incident on the local news afterwards. I guess maybe there are laws or guidelines about not reporting on suicides to prevent copycat incidents. I don't know. In any case, I am incredibly glad that I didn't look down onto the train tracks that day. I have no doubt that seeing something like that would have scarred me for life. This happened just a few months ago, in December of last year. My mother and I went to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, for a 3-day Christmas getaway. Our first hotel was amazing, like something out of a Hallmark movie. It was a complete Christmas fantasy land, with free cookies and hot cocoa in the lobby every night. Soft instrumental Christmas music playing 24/7 in the hallways, and every floor decorated to the nines. I was half joking with my mom, telling her we should just not go back home to Florida and see if they'd let us rent a room for a whole year. The second day, we checked out of that magical place and went to our second hotel. It was a complete downgrade. It was one of those rundown weekly rate type places. The paint was chipping, the carpets were stained, and it was full of weird looking people. It seemed like half the guests were either on drugs or homeless. We were on the third floor though, so I figured we'd be safe from most of the freaks and creeps down below. Oh, how wrong I was. That evening, we realized we needed to print our boarding passes for our flight home the next day. My mom was exhausted from walking around downtown all afternoon, so I offered to go down to the lobby and print them out on the hotel's public computer. Before I left, she handed me her small pocket knife. She showed me how to flick it open quickly, just in case someone tried anything. She also gave me some cash to grab some snacks and sodas from the vending machine for the morning. I took the room key and her knife and headed down the elevator. The doors to the lobby were on the side of the building, and you had to walk outside through part of the parking lot to get to them. As I stepped outside, I saw a large, heavy-set black man standing on the corner of the building, smoking a cigarette. I didn't pay him any mind and just walked past, trying to give him a wide berth. Then I heard his voice, deep and gravelly. "Damn girl, you look fine as hell." I kept walking, ignoring him. "I'd really love a piece of that fine ass," he called out after me. His voice startled me, and I jerked my head to look back at him. He was standing in the dim light of the parking lot, looking straight at me with a wide, creepy smile on his face. I rolled my eyes, muttered, "What a creep," under my breath, and walked into the lobby. I quickly printed out the boarding passes. After grabbing them from the printer, I stood for a moment, looking through the glass doors of the lobby, out into the dark parking lot where I was sure that man was still waiting. I swallowed hard, my hand tightening around the knife in my pocket, and walked back outside. I started the walk back to the elevator entrance, trying to ignore him, but I could hear his footsteps behind me. He was following me. He started saying really disgusting things. "Hey, come here, baby girl. Daddy wants a piece of that little white ass. Come on, baby. Let me show you a good time." I panicked. My heart was hammering against my ribs. But then I remembered the knife. I spun around, pulled it out of my pocket, and flicked the blade open with my thumb, just like my mom had shown me. I held it out in front of me and screamed, "Buzz the hell off before I make you look like Freddy Krueger. I'm not afraid of you. Leave me the hell alone." He stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at me, then at the knife, and then he backed away, walking off into the darkness, muttering, "You're lost, bitch," under his breath. I ran the rest of the way back to our room and told my mom everything. She was furious. She called the front desk, but they just blew her off, saying it wasn't their problem. The police weren't much help either. They said that unless the man had actually touched me, there wasn't much they could do. The next morning, we called a Lyft to take us to the airport. Our driver's name was Jamal. When the car pulled up, my blood ran cold. It was him. It was the same creepy guy from the night before. My mom, not realizing who he was, told me to get in the front passenger seat. I froze. "Are you kidding me?" I whispered to her. "Sit up front with that creepy pervert? No way." But we were running behind and didn't want to miss our flight, so I did it. I got in the front seat. Jamal looked thrilled with this seating arrangement. As we started driving, he began accidentally missing turns that would have taken us to the airport, making the drive longer. He started making disgusting remarks and gestures towards me, looking at me and licking his lips. My mom was disgusted but kept quiet, probably afraid of escalating the situation, but I was fed up. I discreetly showed him the blade of the knife still in my pocket and said in a sickly sweet tone, "Sir, we're going to miss our flight. Please hurry." He shot me a furious glare but complied. He took the next exit and drove straight to the airport. When we got there, my mom handed him a $10 bill for a tip. He looked at it in disgust. "That's it? That's all I get?" He sneered. My mom just nodded, wished him a Merry Christmas, and hustled me into the airport. We made our flight and got home safely. A few weeks later, we saw him on the national news. Apparently, this man, Jamal, had picked up 2 other girls in his Lyft right after us. He had raped and killed both of them. He was eventually caught and arrested. To think that he might have done the same thing to me either that night in the parking lot or during that terrifying drive to the airport, still makes me feel sick. I am so glad my mom gave me that knife. It might have saved my life. Our day had started out so perfectly normal. It was a warm Tuesday in the summer of 2004. My fiancé, Daniel, kissed me goodbye as he headed off to his construction job. I had a busy day ahead of me too. I had to drop off our son, Leo, who was just a year and a half old, at my grandmother's house before I went to my own job as a waitress. We all lived in Rockford, Illinois, and my grandmother lived about a 30-minute drive away in a neighboring town. I remember dropping Leo off. He was usually such a happy, easygoing toddler, but that morning, he was different. When I was leaving, my grandmother told me he clung to my leg and didn't want me to go, which was unusual for him. I worked a double shift that day. Around lunchtime, Daniel came into the diner to see me and his mom, who also worked there. He was all smiles, covered in a light layer of sawdust. He was supposed to work until late that evening, so I told him I would pick up Leo from my grandmother's after my shift ended. I remember he leaned in close before he left, the noise of the busy diner fading away for a second, and whispered, "I love you. See you at home." I smiled back at him, busy with an order, and just nodded. That was the last time I ever saw him alive. My shift ended up finishing early, around 7 p.m. I was excited to get home and have a quiet evening. I drove straight to my grandmother's house to get our son, only to find out that Daniel had also gotten off work early. He had already picked Leo up, wanting to surprise me by having him home when I got there. We didn't really have reliable cell phones back then, not like today, so there was no way for him to call me. My grandmother then told me something that made a cold knot form in my stomach. She said that when Daniel came to pick him up, Leo had thrown a massive tantrum. He screamed and cried and kept saying, "No, no." He had never, ever reacted that way to being with his dad. It was so strange. I drove home, expecting to see Daniel's truck in the driveway and hear our son's happy squeals from inside. But the house was dark and empty. I sat on the couch, my unease growing with every passing minute. It was almost 9 p.m., and they still weren't home. Then the phone rang. It was the call that everyone dreads. A calm, official voice on the other end told me there had been an accident. They told me I needed to get to the hospital. My world just stopped. Before I could even process it and leave, the phone rang again. This time, it was Daniel's dad. He was at a different hospital with Daniel. He said the doctors had stabilized him, but he was being prepped for a helicopter flight to a major trauma center in Chicago. His dad's voice was breaking as he asked me to say something to Daniel, to tell him I loved him because they didn't think he was going to make it. I could hear the rhythmic beeping of machines and the sound of ragged breathing as his dad held the phone to his ear. I don't remember what I said. I just know I said goodbye. I hung up the phone, completely numb. I still had to worry about our son. I drove to the first hospital where Leo had been taken. I don't remember the drive. I think I was on autopilot. I walked into the emergency room and immediately saw a police officer I'd gone to high school with. Our eyes met, and her face just fell. She came over and said, "Oh, Olivia, I am so sorry." She led me into a small private family room and asked me to sit down. She explained what had happened. Daniel and Leo had been driving home, crossing the big bridge over the train tracks on Route 2. A drunk driver, coming the wrong way in their lane, hit them head on. The impact was horrific. The force of the crash then sent their car careening into the steel guardrail of the bridge. The investigators said Daniel must have seen it coming at the last second. His injuries showed that he had braced for the impact, turning his body to shield our son in the car seat behind him. Nearly every bone on the right side of his body was shattered. His face, his arm, his leg, his ribs. The engine of our car was pushed back into the cabin, crushing his legs. But his last act had saved our son's life. The car seat, which he had so carefully installed, held firm. The front seats were pushed so far back that the only part of the back seat that was left was the small corner where Leo's seat had been. The rest of the back of the car was just gone. Our son had a broken leg, right at the growth plate, and a broken orbital bone in his face that tore his tear duct. He had cuts all over him from the shattered glass of the baby food jars that had been in the diaper bag in the trunk. But he was alive. The drunk driver who hit them was killed on impact. His wife and 2 kids, who were also in the car with him, survived with serious injuries. If that guardrail on the bridge hadn't held, our car would have plunged 75 feet down onto the train tracks below. I thank God for that guardrail every single day. The days and weeks that followed are a blur of grief and hospital visits. But our son, Leo, recovered. He grew up so fast. He's about to turn 21 now, and he's serving his 3rd year in the Army. He married his high school sweetheart, and they're expecting their first child, a little girl, this summer. He is a good man, just like his father. The night I lost Daniel, I learned the hardest lesson of all. Tell the people you love that you love them, every single chance you get. Because in the blink of an eye, your entire world can change forever. I'm 29 now, but this happened when I was 19, back when I was still married to my ex-husband, Mark. It's not the scariest story you'll ever hear, but it terrified me at the time, and it's one of those memories that makes my skin crawl whenever I think about it. We were driving home late one night from a friend's house on the outskirts of Las Vegas. It was around 2 a.m, and the city that never sleeps was starting to feel a little sleepy and a lot more sketchy. My gas light had been on for the last 20 miles, and we were running on fumes. The problem was, at that time of night, in that part of town, there weren't many options. We had to pull into one of those rundown, poorly lit gas stations that you try to avoid. As we pulled up to the pump, I immediately felt uneasy. The place just had a bad vibe. I noticed a man pacing back and forth in front of the convenience store entrance. He was thin, with greasy hair and a stained t-shirt, and he was talking animatedly on his cell phone. When Mark got out of the car to pump the gas, my instincts screamed at me. The second he closed his door, I reached over and hit the lock button, securing all the doors. I kept my eyes on the guy. He was giving off major creep signals. The moment Mark walked inside the store to pay, the man ended his phone call and made a beeline straight for our car. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I watched him get closer and closer, his walk a strange, lurching shuffle. I almost pissed myself. I panicked and lunged across the center console towards the driver's side door, fumbling for my taser, which I always kept in the door pocket. My fingers closed around the cool plastic just as he reached my window. I heard a soft tapping sound. I looked up and he was standing right there, his face just inches from the glass. He was peering in at me with this wide, unnatural smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. His teeth were yellow. I took a deep breath and rolled the window down, but only a tiny crack, just enough for us to hear each other. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice shaking. He asked me if I could help him turn his phone on. His voice was raspy. I immediately replied, "I don't think you need help with that. I literally just saw you talking on it." His smile faltered for a second. He told me it had just turned off and insisted that he needed help, asking if I could just get out of the car for a second to look at it. There was no way in hell I was doing that. I told him no, and then I told him to get away from me and my car. That's when his whole demeanor changed. The creepy smile vanished and was replaced by a look of pure anger. He suddenly grabbed the handle of my passenger door and tried to yank it open. The lock held, but the sound of him rattling the door sent a jolt of pure terror through me. I screamed and held up the taser, pointing it directly at his face through the window. I pressed the button, and the loud, menacing crackle of electricity filled the small space of the car. I showed him I had it, that I was not helpless, and that I would absolutely use it on him. Thank God, it worked. He took a step back from the car, his eyes wide. Just then, the door to the convenience store opened, and Mark came walking out. The man saw him, gave me one last dark look, and then quickly walked away, disappearing into the shadows behind the building. I was so terrified that I burst into tears as I told Mark what had just happened. He was furious and wanted to go after the guy, but he was long gone. We didn't call the police, which I regret now, but we did go back inside and tell the clerk what had happened so she would be on the lookout for him. As we drove away, I looked back and saw him standing across the street, just watching us leave. That image is what sticks with me the most. We were safe, but things could have gone so wrong so fast. It was a terrifying reminder that you always have to be aware of your surroundings, especially when you feel most vulnerable. This isn't the scariest story in the world, but it definitely proves that there are some incredibly manipulative and crazy women out there. I was around 10 years old at the time this all happened, back in 2013. My dad, who was a few years sober at that point, had met this woman named Casey. They worked at the same place, a company that actively helped people in recovery, so they were supporting each other in their sobriety. My relationship with my dad was finally starting to heal after years of being strained by his addiction. He had his own apartment, and I would stay with him on the weekends when I wasn't at my mom's house. Casey lived in the apartment complex right next to his. I remember the first time I met her. We walked over to the little dog park next to her building to meet her and her dog. She seemed nice enough at first, friendly and bubbly. She started staying over at my dad's place more and more, and pretty soon, I'm sure she had basically moved in, even though she still technically had her own apartment. There was one thing she did that always bothered me though. She would always, and I mean always, clean my room for me when I was there. I absolutely hated it. I'm the kind of person who has a specific place for everything. I like my stuff arranged a certain way, and her moving everything around always made me quietly angry. But I was a kid, so I didn't say much. Time went on, and one day my dad told me that Casey was pregnant. I was actually really happy about it. I was excited to be a big sister, but I started noticing things that worried me. I would often see her outside on the balcony, smoking a cigarette. It really scared me because I knew she was pregnant, and I knew that was bad for the baby. A few months later, my dad told me that he had broken up with her. I was really shocked and confused. I didn't understand why, but I was still excited about having a little sibling on the way. Not long after that, my dad got back together with his ex-girlfriend, a woman named Ashley, who is now my stepmother. We did see Casey one more time after the breakup. She picked me up from my mom's house one day without my dad knowing and took me to get ice cream. My dad was furious when he found out and made me block her number and delete her from my phone. During that ice cream trip, she told me that she was having a boy and that she wanted to name him Asher, but she couldn't because the name reminded her too much of Ashley. Now, this is where the story gets completely insane. The last time we ever heard from Casey was a few weeks later when she sent a text message to my father saying that she had lost the baby. We never heard from her again after that. Years later, I found out the whole truth. It turned out she had been lying about everything. She had told my mother that my dad forced her to quit her job because they shouldn't work together, which was a complete lie. She also claimed my dad never went to any of the doctor's appointments with her because he was too busy or didn't care. The reality was, she never told him when the appointments were or actively made sure he couldn't go. And here's the craziest part of all. My dad had asked her for pictures of the sonogram. She ended up sending him random sonogram pictures that she had downloaded from the internet. She was never pregnant. It was all a lie. She made the whole thing up. All in all, this woman completely traumatized a 10-year-old girl and lied about being pregnant with my child, all in a desperate, manipulative attempt to get back together with my father, which didn't even work. Casey, if you're out there somewhere, you are a terrible and disturbed person. I think my dad didn't just dodge a bullet. He dodged a nuclear missile by breaking up with you. I still can't believe someone would lie about something like that. Who the hell does that? My name is Leo, and I'm 29 years old. I live in a suburb of Grand Rapids, Michigan, a place where hockey is practically a religion. This story isn't some supernatural horror, but it's a real-life kind of terror that sticks with you, a reminder of how quickly everything can go wrong. It happened in early December of 2023. By day, I work as a custodian at a local elementary school. It's a steady job, pays the bills. But my real passion is hockey, so a few nights a week, I have a part-time gig working for the Grand Rapids Griffins, the local AL team. I'm the guy inside the mascot costume, Griff. It's a weird job, but I love the energy of the arena and being part of the game day experience. On this particular night, it was a huge game. The Griffins were playing their big rivals, the Rockford IceHogs. The arena was going to be packed. My usual route to the arena from my house takes about 20 minutes. I drive through my quiet subdivision, then onto a series of back roads to avoid the worst of the traffic on the main highways. The final stretch takes me through a busy commercial area on the south side of the city. The arena is located right off a major intersection, Bayview Street and Mapleview Drive. This area is a nightmare on game nights. It's always jammed with cars and swarming with pedestrians walking from satellite parking lots to the arena. The game was at 7:30 p.m., so I was heading out around 6:45 p.m. to get there, get suited up, and be ready. It was cold and dark, with a light slushy snow starting to fall. I was in my old but reliable Subaru, listening to a sports podcast, just going through the motions of my commute. The traffic was, as expected, brutal. I finally made it to the intersection of Bayview and Mapleview and was sitting at a red light in the left turn lane, waiting to turn towards the arena parking lot. My phone buzzed. It was my friend Mike, who also works for the team. He was asking where I was. I picked up the phone, telling him I was just a block away, stuck at the light. He told me to hurry up, that the pre-game festivities were about to start. I told him I'd be there in 5 minutes and ended the call. The second I hung up the phone, I heard a sound that I can only describe as a metallic shriek, followed by a series of heavy, sickening thuds. It was loud and violent and came from just ahead of me at the corner of the intersection. My first thought was that a semi-truck had dropped its cargo, but then I saw something fly through the air. It was a single white Converse sneaker, arcing through the dim light before it landed softly on the hood of my car. My blood ran cold. I looked towards the gas station on the corner where the sound had come from, and my heart just dropped into my stomach. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There had been a multi-car pileup. A beat-up Dodge Ram pickup truck had clearly run the red light at high speed and slammed into a Mazda hatchback and a Chevy crossover that were in the intersection. The cars were mangled, steam pouring from their crushed front ends. But that wasn't the worst of it. As I stared, I saw 2 people lying on the ground near the crosswalk, completely still. A third person was crumpled against the traffic light pole. It was the first time in my life I had ever seen something like that in person. Real human beings, unmoving on the pavement. It was like a scene from a movie, but the cold, wet reality of it was terrifying. For a second, my brain just froze. Then, my training kicked in. I immediately dialed 911, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I stammered out what I had seen and the location of the accident. I knew I couldn't stay. I had to get to work, but the image was seared into my mind. When I finally pulled into the arena's employee parking lot, my mind was racing with anxiety. I felt nauseous. I ran into Mike just inside the door. He took one look at my face and asked what was wrong. I told him about the accident, about the cars, about the people on the ground. He swore under his breath and said that was the second major accident at that exact intersection in less than a month. Apparently, 2 weeks prior, an elderly man had been hit by a car while crossing the street after a game. Thankfully, he had survived, but it was clear the intersection was a death trap. Putting on the heavy, smiling mascot costume that night was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I felt like a fraud, trying to pump up the crowd and dance around when all I could think about were those people lying in the street. I went through the motions, but my heart wasn't in it. I kept picturing that white sneaker landing on my hood. The next day, the full story came out in the local news. The driver of the Dodge Ram was a woman in her early 30s. She had been driving under the influence of both alcohol and crystal meth. The 3 people she hit were pedestrians, athletes from the Special Olympics who were on their way to the game. It made the whole thing even more heartbreaking. They were just innocent people, excited for a night out, and their lives were changed forever because of one person's reckless disregard for everyone else. Miraculously, all 3 victims survived, though they had to be airlifted to a hospital in Ann Arbor with critical injuries. The woman was, of course, arrested and charged. Seeing her mugshot in the news article, a blank, tired-looking face, just filled me with a deep, cold anger. That night in December still gives me chills. It was a brutal, first-hand look at how a life, or multiple lives, can be nearly extinguished in the blink of an eye. It's a moment of near death that I will never, ever forget. I'm a 31-year-old woman from Germany now, but this all happened back in 2014, during and right after a stay I had in a mental hospital. Before I get into the story, I need to give some background so you can understand the fragile state I was in at the time. I was born in Bosnia, but my family came to Germany as refugees during the war in the 90s. My father was a raging alcoholic who only married my mother for her small inheritance, and he made it clear he wanted nothing to do with us. Years of his abuse, combined with being bullied at school and having to be the strong child for my broken mother and older brother, turned me into a complete wreck. I kept it all bottled up inside until 2014. After a particularly nasty breakup on top of being bullied at a new job, I finally shattered. My nervous breakdown involved me spending my days crying, not eating, not sleeping, and not leaving my room until my mother found me and got me hospitalized. I was eventually diagnosed with PTSD, major depression, and borderline personality disorder. I apologize for the long backstory, but it's important to understand that I was at the absolute lowest point in my life, which is why I was completely blind to the giant red flags this boy was waving in my face. Let's call him Kevin. I met Kevin online through a support forum during my 2nd month in the hospital. He seemed nice at first. Our conversations quickly got darker, and he told me all about his own struggles with depression and other mental illnesses. At the time, this didn't scare me off. It actually made him seem more relatable and attractive to me. We texted constantly and got along really well. At this point in my therapy, I was allowed to go home for the weekends, so Kevin and I made plans to meet up the following weekend. In my vulnerable state, I was genuinely excited and couldn't wait. To my disappointment, he completely ghosted me as soon as I got home. I waited all day Saturday, texting him, but heard nothing. It wasn't until I arrived back at the hospital on Sunday evening that he finally replied. He gave a lame excuse about being busy and apologized for making me wait. I checked in with the nurses and then went out to the little fenced-in yard the hospital had. It was a therapy area with some animals like goats and rabbits. It was about 7 p.m., and it was already completely dark outside, but I wanted some privacy to text him back. As I was typing, I got this powerful, uneasy feeling of being watched. I looked around the dark yard, but I couldn't see anyone. Then I heard a faint shuffling sound not too far away. I tried to tell myself it was just one of the animals moving around in their pen, but I was suddenly very aware of how isolated I was. I headed back towards the hospital building, and I heard more strange noises behind me, which I tried my best to ignore. A week later, Kevin and I finally did meet up. We had a good time, sitting and talking for hours in my small apartment. He didn't give off any overtly strange vibes yet, aside from the general mysterious, mentally ill guy persona that I, for some reason, found appealing back then. We started meeting up every weekend after that, and he even picked me up from the hospital a couple of times. At the end of my 3rd month, I was finally discharged. I went back to my normal life, working a full-time job and taking care of my dog, Isaac. This was also when Kevin started to act strangely. It was subtle at first. I would just catch him standing in the doorway, watching me after I had left the room to get something from the kitchen. But soon, it got worse. I would catch him peeking behind the shower curtain while I was in the shower. I told him to stop, that it made me really uncomfortable, But even after that, I would still feel his presence there, or feel his stare on me while I was changing clothes. He also started to be really mean to my dog. Isaac isn't a very social dog. He mostly just ignores people. But Kevin would aggressively push him away for no reason, like when Isaac was just walking towards me to be petted. He would insult my dog, calling him stupid, and he acted genuinely jealous of the attention I gave him. I tried to talk to him about all of this, but he would just brush it off and tell me I was imagining things. The final nail in the coffin was the evening he told me, completely seriously, that I should get rid of my dog so that he could be the only one looking at me. It was a bizarre and chilling thing to say. At that point, I had finally had enough. I had tolerated his creepy behavior for a while, partly out of a fear of being alone after my recovery. And now he was just making me uncomfortable. And I was honestly getting scared for my dog's safety. He was giving off seriously bad vibes. So, I broke it off with him. He left without much of a fight, and I felt a huge wave of relief, like I had just narrowly escaped a very dangerous situation. The stalking began about a month later. Every now and then, I would see his car parked near my workplace or near my apartment building, with no one inside. At first, it was just annoying, but I started to get more and more anxious. I started getting that same feeling I used to have when he was standing behind the shower curtain, but now I would feel it while walking home from work. One evening, I was sure I saw him disappear around a corner just ahead of me. I knew it was him every time because my dog, Isaac, would start growling in a specific direction, his hair standing on end. But of course, I had no proof, so there was nothing I could do. I would just walk home as fast as I could. He seemed to be afraid of dogs, so I knew he would probably keep his distance as long as Isaac was with me, which made it slightly more bearable. This went on for almost a full year, but it did eventually stop, for the most part. For years afterwards, I would still get cryptic messages from him from strange numbers, and I never saw him or felt his presence again. It was a long time ago, but even now, after moving far away, I still won't go anywhere by myself without my dog by my side. Back in the summer of 2020, during the height of the pandemic, my life had devolved into a pretty simple routine. Work from home, play video games, and drink a little too much beer. It was a boring but effective way to pass the time. One Friday night, I was deep into a gaming session with a buddy online when I made the tragic discovery that my fridge was empty. I needed to make a beer run. The only place open late was the local gas station, a brightly lit but kind of grimy place just a few minutes from my house in our small Texas town. It's the kind of place that always seems to have at least one flickering fluorescent light. As I pulled my car into the parking lot, I noticed a big lifted pickup truck parked at one of the pumps. 4 large guys were standing around it, laughing and shouting. They were being incredibly loud and obnoxious, and a couple of them were stumbling around, clearly already very drunk. This wasn't exactly a rare sight in my town, which has its fair share of folks who enjoy a good time a little too much, so I didn't think much of it. I just wanted to get my beer and get back to my game. I walked into the store and headed straight for the coolers in the back. I grabbed a 12-pack of my usual and walked up to the counter. Just as I got there, the 4 men from the truck came inside to pay for their gas. The cashier was a young woman, maybe a college student. She looked new. I went to that station all the time and had never seen her before. As the men crowded around the counter, their whole demeanor changed. They started making comments to her, quiet at first, then louder and more explicit. They were saying crude, sexual things about her appearance, asking her what time she got off work and which car in the parking lot was hers. I could see the girl's hands start to shake. Her friendly customer service smile had vanished, replaced by a look of pure fear. She was trying to count out their change, but her fingers were fumbling with the coins. She looked like she was about to cry. I felt this hot surge of anger. I'm not a big guy. I'm about 6 feet tall and have a decent build, but these 4 men were huge. Each one of them probably had a good 50 pounds and several inches on me. If things turned physical, I knew I stood absolutely no chance. But watching them terrorize this poor girl, I just couldn't stand there and do nothing. My mouth moved before my brain could stop it. I took a step forward and said, in a voice that was way louder and more confident than I felt, "Hey, just pay for your stuff and get out of here. Leave her alone." The entire store went silent. All four of them slowly turned and looked at me. The friendly, drunken laughing was gone. Their eyes were hard and cold. In that instant, my heart plummeted into my stomach. I realized the incredibly stupid and dangerous situation I had just put myself in. I could see the main guy, the biggest of the four, tense up. His jaw was clenched. I braced myself, expecting him to walk over and knock my teeth out. My mind was racing, trying to figure out if I should run or fight or just apologize. But then, by some miracle, he just gave me a long, hard stare, shot me a pissed-off look, then grunted at his friends. He threw the money on the counter, and they all turned and walked out without another word. The air in the store felt thick with tension. I walked up to the counter. The cashier was still shaking, her face pale. I asked her if she was okay. She nodded, but she couldn't speak. I asked her if she wanted me to call the police for her, but she shook her head and whispered that her manager was in the back office. I just said, "Okay," paid for my beer, and walked out. I glanced around the parking lot, my heart still hammering in my chest. The big truck was gone. I did a quick jog to my car, constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting them to be waiting for me around the corner of the building, but they weren't. I got in, locked the doors, and drove home, checking my rearview mirror the entire way. The rest of the night, I couldn't even focus on my video game. The feeling of relief was huge, but so was the lingering fear of what could have happened. It's a strange feeling, being terrified and proud of yourself at the same time. If you ever see something like that happening, and you're in a position to step in, you should. Just be aware that it might not always end as well as it did for me. One night, my friends and I decided to get together to hang out and play some old video games. My best friend, Alexis, was dating a guy I knew from high school named Jason. He invited his best friend, Carter, over, and Alexis and I invited our close friend, Cameron. Cameron brought his sister-in-law, Brittany, with him. They all arrived at Jason's house excited for a night of Super Nintendo and Nintendo 64. While everyone was getting settled, Jason was in the kitchen getting snacks and drinks ready. He realized we were out of a few things, so a few of us decided to walk to the gas station a couple of blocks away. While we were there, Cameron bought some drinks and Jason bought a new lighter. When we got back to Jason's house, he started telling us about some trouble he was having with his roommate, Jennifer. Jason had a cat that he had to take to his mom's house because it wasn't getting along with Jennifer's cat. He said that Jennifer had come into his room one day to complain about the cats, and when he waved her off, she started hitting him on the back. He confessed that he had reacted and hit her back. He didn't go into much more detail, but I admit I felt uncomfortable hearing it. I sat there in silence, wondering how I should feel, especially since he was dating my best friend, Alexis. We were all sitting in the living room in a circle, just chatting, when the doorbell rang. A strange guy walked in, said a quick, "Hi," went into the kitchen to talk to Jason for a moment, and then left just as quickly as he came. As Jason shut the door, he looked at all of us and said, "By the way, my house was broken into. There's a bunch of broken glass outside. I'm not sure if you guys saw it when we walked to the gas station." Brittany said she had seen it and was about to ask about it. "Well," Jason continued, "there's more to the story about Jennifer. She lied to her friend Paul, telling him that I beat her up. I mean, yeah, I hit her back, but I didn't beat her. So today, I came home and found glass all over my front yard. I found out that Paul is the one who broke my windows. He's under the impression that I threw rocks at his house and stole some of his stuff. That's impossible, though. As you all know, I was with my mom all last week, which is a 5-hour drive from here." We all looked at him with worry, especially Alexis. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Jason said. I'm just glad you're all here with me." Just then, there were several loud bangs on the front door. Jason opened it, and it was Paul, standing there looking completely unhinged. "What do you want, Paul?" Jason asked. "Let me in," Paul demanded. "No, dude, you need to go home," Jason said. "I know you broke into my house today," Paul yelled. As this was happening, Cameron and Carter got up and stood next to Jason in the doorway, a show of force that ultimately scared Paul away. "Who the hell is that guy?" Cameron asked. Jason explained that Paul was Jennifer's friend and that he was obsessed with her, but she didn't feel the same way. I added that Paul had gone to high school with both me and Jason. "That guy is crazy," Carter said. "There's something seriously wrong with him." I told them I thought we should call the cops. Brittany and Alexis both nodded in agreement. I grabbed my phone and was just about to dial 911 when suddenly we heard even louder knocks at the door, more like violent pounding. This time, Carter answered it. The door was kicked open, and a strange man struck Carter on the head, sending him staggering back. The girls, including me, rushed to the corner of the living room, huddling together in terror. Cameron got up, his fists clenched, ready to fight, but a third intruder came in and hit him on the side with a baseball bat, causing him to collapse onto the couch in pain. Everything was happening so fast. I ran into the kitchen, desperately looking for a piece of mail with the house's address on it, as my phone was already ringing with the 911 operator on the line. "Emergency. What is your location?" the operator asked. "Please help us. 3 men just kicked their way into my friend's house near Cutler Bay. They have axes and bats. Please send someone," I yelled into the phone. The operator was having a hard time finding the address. "I can tell you we're near the Health South building, 2 houses down on that road. Please, hurry." That's when I saw it. I saw Jason on the floor, and Paul was standing over him, striking him on the head with what looked like a machete or an axe. He was screaming at him in Spanish. "This is what you get for hitting women," over and over again. Then, one of the other men yelled, "Shit, she's on the phone with the cops. Run, get out of here." Paul and the other 2 men ran out of the house. I saw them jump into a white sedan, maybe an old Buick, and I told the operator they were driving away in a white car. I quickly ran to the door and locked it, then rushed over to Jason. My heart dropped when I saw Alexis on the floor next to him, sobbing hysterically. I grabbed towels from the closet and gave them to her, trying to help her wrap his wounds. His face was covered in blood. Brittany, brave girl that she is, had also been on the phone with an operator. She had run outside, grabbed a piece of mail from the mailbox, and was giving the dispatcher the exact address. We locked the door again, and not long after, we heard 3 loud bangs. This time, it was the police. An officer walked in and asked us to step outside. I looked to my right and saw Cameron groaning on the couch and Carter holding his head, blood seeping through his fingers. "Guys, I think I'm going to die," Carter whispered. An officer led me out of the house while paramedics rushed in to help Carter, Cameron, and Jason. I watched as they took Carter and Cameron away in an ambulance. The officer sat me down in a squad car and told me he needed to take me to the station to get my statement. My mind was racing. I was wondering where everyone was, what was happening. I couldn't stop blaming myself for not getting the address sooner. We arrived at the police headquarters, and I was led to an interview room. The officers asked me to explain in detail everything I remembered. After a while, they came back and told me that everyone else's stories matched mine. That's when I asked, "What about Jason?" The officer's face softened with pity. "Emily, you don't know?" he asked gently. "I know he was on the floor, and he was groaning. What happened?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Emily, we're so sorry to tell you this, but Jason died at the scene. The paramedics did everything they could, but he couldn't hang on." My world collapsed. I went to the restroom and just screamed. I couldn't stop wishing I had been faster, that I had done something different. It's been 11 years since that night in 2012. Alexis is married now. Cameron has 2 kids. I was told that Carter changed after that night, that he isn't the same person anymore. Paul was sentenced to death for the murder. His stepfather, who was one of the other men, was sentenced to 14 years. His cousin got a few years. A case was built, and I went to court to testify. They've all tried to appeal for lesser sentences. I haven't been subpoenaed since. I really only have a few words left to say now. Rest in peace, Jason. For my own safety, I'm just going to go by the name Kate. This all happened back in 2018. My mom had a long and difficult battle with drug addiction and a lifetime of making poor decisions. She had been married at least 3 times, and her third and final marriage was to a member of the Hells Angels. For anyone who doesn't know, they're a very dangerous outlaw motorcycle gang, especially here in California. They're known for a whole range of crimes: drug dealing, trafficking stolen goods, gun running, extortion, and from what I understand, prostitution and murder. I always hated this man. I'll call him Rick. He knew I hated him, and he seemed to get a sick pleasure out of it. He would purposely antagonize me, trying to get a reaction out of me. He was horribly abusive to my mom, both physically and mentally. I remember one time he hit her so hard that he broke her cheekbone. She wouldn't go to the hospital for it because he wouldn't allow her to. He was already on his last strike for violent offenses, and another one would have sent him back to prison for a long time. On May 3rd, 2018, I got a series of strange text messages from my mom. She was supposed to be clean at this time, but I knew better. She was rambling on about how she was finally going to leave Rick. The texts were frantic and paranoid. She wrote, and I'll never forget this: I would never hurt myself. If anything bad happens to me, you need to know that someone else did it. I would never do that to myself. She ended the message by telling me not to text that number again because it was Rick's phone and she had to give it back to him. She promised she would be in touch as soon as she got away and got a new phone. Reading the texts, my heart sank. My first thought was that she was just high, probably on another meth binge, and had no idea what she was talking about. As the child of a drug addict, you get used to this kind of thing. You get used to burner phones, different numbers for every call, and the occasional disappearance for weeks or even months at a time. You learn to build a wall around your heart. 5 days later, on May 8th, I was sitting in my kitchen having lunch with my roommate. My phone rang, and I saw Rick's name appear on the screen. I felt immediately sick to my stomach. I hated him, and I had no desire to ever hear his voice again. But some dark premonition, some gut feeling pushed me to answer the call. When I did, I heard his voice, dripping with fake, pathetic sadness. "Kate," he said, "your mother's dead." It was an overdose. I just dropped the phone and fell to the floor. I was screaming and crying. Another thing you learn as the child of an addict is that you spend your whole life waiting for that call. You think you're prepared for it, but when it finally comes, the pain is 1,000 times worse than you could ever have imagined. As time went on, I was contacted by a detective from the sheriff's department who was investigating her death. I didn't share any information with him. A few months after my mom died, I found out I was pregnant with my first child. It wasn't just about me anymore. I had my new baby to think about, and the Hells Angels are not people you want to mess with. They have long memories and a brutal reputation. To keep myself and my unborn child safe, I decided to keep the information about her last text to myself, but I saved them. I have screenshots of every single word she sent me that day. Much later, when the coroner's report was finally released, I found out that the drugs found in her system were all from prescriptions. Prescriptions that belonged to Rick. I'm not sure if I'll ever know the full truth of what happened to my mother in that house. Maybe it was an accidental overdose, or maybe he helped her along. Maybe he found out she was planning to leave and made sure she never would. Either way, my children will never get to know their grandmother. And for that, I hate him more now than I ever did before. I'm 17 now, but this all happened when I was 12, almost 5 years ago. I remember that night so clearly, every little detail feels like it's burned into my brain. My neighborhood is one of those places you see in commercials for family cars. It's a quiet, sprawling suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, with nice houses, manicured lawns, and kids riding bikes in the street. Nothing truly bad ever seemed to happen there. The main road that runs along the edge of our subdivision, let's call it Route 33, is a busy 4-lane street. On the other side of that road, directly across from the entrance to our neighborhood, sits a large gas station and convenience store complex. It's a 24-hour place with a little diner attached, so it's always got cars coming and going, mostly truckers or people heading somewhere else. Our house is just a short walk from that entrance, maybe 100 yards or so. That night was a Saturday in late October of 2019. The air had that crisp, cool feeling of autumn, and the leaves were turning all shades of red and yellow. I was in the living room, curled up on our big comfy couch, watching some reruns of a sitcom. It was just after 10 p.m. My mom, Sarah, was in her bedroom reading, and my older sister, Chloe, was probably on her phone in her room, as usual. The house was quiet, filled only with the low murr of the television. Then the sound hit. It wasn't just a crash. It was a violent metallic scream that seemed to tear through the fabric of the night, followed by a sickening, grinding crunch that vibrated through the floorboards. It was the kind of sound that you feel in your bones, a noise so wrong and final that everything inside you just stops. Immediately, I heard doors open down the hallway. My mom and Chloe appeared in the doorway of the living room, their faces pale and wide-eyed. My mom asked if we heard that, which was a ridiculous question. A person on the moon probably could have heard it. I think we were all in a state of shock, trying to process a sound that was so far outside our normal, quiet existence. I don't remember who suggested we go look, but the next thing I knew, all three of us had thrown on jackets and shoes and were walking out the front door into the chilly night. As we walked down our street towards the main road, other porch lights were flicking on. We saw a few of our neighbors, the Millers from across the street, and old Mr. Henderson, also heading in the same direction, drawn by that awful sound. When we reached the end of our street and could see the gas station clearly, the scene was worse than I could have imagined. Under the bright, sterile lights of the gas station canopy, there was chaos. Two vehicles were mangled on Route 33. One was a huge, white Ford F-150. The other was a small, dark blue Honda Civic, or what was left of it. The truck looked like it had barely a scratch on its massive front bumper, but the little Honda was destroyed. The entire driver's side was caved in, compressed like a crushed soda can. The car was barely recognizable. People were pouring out of the convenience store and the diner, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. Someone was already on the phone, their voice high and shaky as they yelled directions to a 911 operator. Amid all the shouting and confusion, a sudden thought hit me. My new puppy, a little beagle I had named Copper, was home alone. He was only a few months old, and the thought of him being scared by himself while we were gone for who knows how long made my stomach twist. I asked my mom if I could run back and get him. She just nodded, her eyes still glued to the wreckage. I ran as fast as I could back to the house, my heart pounding in my chest for a completely different reason now. I scooped up my little puppy, holding him tight against my chest. His warm, trembling body was a small comfort. I locked the door and hurried back to the scene. By the time I returned, the night was filled with the wail of sirens. Police cars, fire trucks, and an ambulance were arriving, their flashing red and blue lights painting a terrifying, strobing pattern on everything. It wasn't hard to piece together what had happened. The Ford F-150 was in the wrong lane, facing the wrong direction. The little Honda was trying to make a left turn from the main road into our neighborhood entrance. The driver of the truck, clearly drunk and speeding, must have plowed straight into the side of the Honda as it was turning. The impact was so violent it had spun both cars around. The couple in the Honda, a husband and wife, were killed instantly. The paramedics worked for a few minutes, but then they just stopped and pulled white sheets over the windows of the car. Later, they brought out 2 body bags. The driver of the truck, however, had been thrown from his vehicle. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and the force of the crash had flung him out of the driver's side door. He had landed face down on the grassy median. For a while, everyone thought he was dead too. But then, unbelievably, he started to move. He slowly, clumsily got to his feet. He had a dazed, confused look on his face as he stumbled back towards his truck, as if he was just going to get in and drive away. He was so intoxicated that he seemed completely unaware of the carnage he had caused. He didn't have a visible scratch on him. The alcohol seemed to have made him feel no pain. I watched as the police officers walked over to him, their faces grim, and put him in handcuffs. I heard one of our neighbors who worked at the gas station tell my mom that the man in the truck had a pregnant woman with him in the passenger seat. She had been taken away by the ambulance, but no one knew how she or her baby were. We stood there for what felt like hours, a silent crowd of witnesses. I'll never forget the sight of the firefighters using the jaws of life to cut the roof off the Honda, and I'll never forget the small, steady drip of dark red blood leaking from underneath the car, forming a small, dark pool on the asphalt. It's a memory that still plays in my head when it's late and quiet. We finally walked home around 1 a.m., the puppy still cradled in my arms. The three of us, my mom, my sister, and I, were too shaken to sleep in our own beds. We all piled into my mom's king-size bed, even letting Copper lay with us, which was a first. My mom turned on the TV for some background noise, and ironically, a horror movie marathon was on. The first movie playing was some slasher film, and the sound of screams from the television felt horribly out of place. A few days later, we read in the local paper that the couple who died lived just a few streets over from us. They were just trying to get home. The driver was charged with 2 counts of vehicular manslaughter and a DUI. This experience taught me how one person's selfish, terrible decision can shatter so many lives in an instant. It showed me just how fragile life is and how quickly it can be taken away. This story isn't mine, but it belongs to a former coworker, and it's a call that I will never, ever forget. It's the reason I left the industry. For a short period of time, I worked as a 911 dispatcher. Our dispatch center served a town that most people would consider extremely safe. It was the kind of place where people still felt comfortable sleeping with their doors unlocked. The town has grown a lot in the last few years, and unfortunately, so has the crime rate, but it's still one of the safest places to live in my state. I remember I was working the day shift that month from 3 a.m. to 3 p.m. It had been a rough day all around. We were getting slammed with calls, everything from home break-ins and carjackings to several bad car accidents. It was just one of those days that drains you completely. My very last call of the shift was a multi-car pileup with severe injuries. I was so relieved to finally clock out and go home. I remember taking a long, hot bath just to try and unwind before crashing into bed around 5 p.m. to get ready for my 3 a.m. shift the next morning. When I walked into work the next day, the tension in the room was so thick you could feel it. I knew immediately that something bad had happened overnight. As I sat down at my console to get set up for the day, I looked over at my coworker, Maria, the dispatcher I was relieving. She was just sitting there, silent, staring blankly into space. Her face was pale, and her eyes were empty. That's when I knew she was the one who took the call. She told me about it later, her voice quiet and trembling. It was around 2 a.m. when a 911 call dropped into her ear. She was immediately met with the sounds of screaming and what was clearly a violent domestic dispute happening in the background. Through the chaos, she managed to get the location pinned and sent officers rushing to the address. As she was trying to get more information, the line disconnected. She frantically called the number back. A woman answered, crying hysterically. Through the woman's desperate screams and sobs, Maria could hear a man shouting. Then she heard the gunshots, a series of them. And then the line went silent. Officers were the first to arrive on the scene. They found 2 young children, both with severe gunshot wounds, and a woman who was barely hanging on to life. They also found a deceased man in the living room. Paramedics and officers rushed the woman and her 2 children to the hospital. Later, we learned just how bad the injuries were. One child had been shot in the face. The other child had been shot in the chest, twice. Both were clinging to life by a thread. The mother had been shot in the chest, the back, and the leg, and she was on life support. The deceased man at the scene was the father. He was the one who had shot his entire family before ultimately turning the gun on himself. I will never forget the image of Maria leaving at the end of her shift that night, with tears streaming down her face, not knowing if she had just heard an entire family's last words. The uncertainty of it all is what haunts dispatchers. Several days later, our supervisor got a call from one of the lead detectives on the case. He told us that, against all odds, the mother and both of her children were going to make it. They would have life-altering injuries, both physical and emotional, but they were alive. I remember sitting at my desk and crying with relief when I heard that news, but that day changed something in me. I knew I couldn't do that job anymore. The weight of it was too much. I quit 2 weeks later. To all the dispatchers, police officers, EMTs, nurses, doctors, and every other first responder out there, thank you. People have no idea the burdens you carry. And to that father who tried to annihilate his own family, I hope you're enjoying whatever hell you ended up in. At the time this story took place, I had just turned 21. I'm a female, and I was raised by a very conservative Christian family in the Bible Belt. As a result, I was incredibly naive and probably seemed much younger than my age. I had also been through a significant trauma at age 14, and some mental health experts say that can stunt your emotional development for a while. To say I was sheltered is an understatement. I was homeschooled my entire life. I think I only ever had 2 friends come over to my house growing up, and each of them only visited once. I became so introverted and timid that I couldn't get a job for almost 2 years after high school because the anxiety of just filling out an application was overwhelming. An interview was completely out of the question. Eventually, I got my first job at a daycare. I'm the oldest in my family, so caring for kids felt natural. But I made a lot of first-time job mistakes, and after 2 years, I realized some of my coworkers were actively trying to get me fired. I started looking for something else. Through my mom's homeschooling network, we met a woman from the States living in Germany. Her name was Mrs. V, and she had 3 kids, an 11-year-old boy, M, a 9-year-old girl, N, and an 8-year-old girl, K. We did a few Skype interviews, and she explained she was looking for an au pair to help her transition from being a stay-at-home mom to pursuing her career. Her husband's job kept him away for months at a time, so she was essentially a single mom. Looking back now, I have more compassion for her situation. But at the time, all my experience was with my well-behaved, quiet siblings or with much younger toddlers. When she offered me the position, I accepted, mostly because my parents were so excited for me. They wanted me to become more independent and didn't know how to help me anymore. I'm a people pleaser, so I ignored the bad feeling I had and took the job, despite the fact they were only going to pay me €200 a month for what was essentially round-the-clock babysitting. It was supposed to be a 6-month contract. To go from being too nervous to drive to an interview to flying 12 hours across the world was a massive leap. When I got there, everything seemed okay at first. The kids were excited. The mom was hard to read, and our conversations were awkward. I assumed we'd get to know each other, and I'd soon be able to manage the kids as she would. I couldn't have been more wrong. She constantly told me, "You can't believe a word they say. The kids lie all the time." But then, when I would tell her something they did, she would always believe their version of the story over mine. Growing up, I'd never had alcohol. She and the kids thought this was hilarious and would make a point to drink wine in front of me. Even the 8-year-old would sneak sips from her mom's glass. One time, when the mom was out of town for a week for work, I was supposed to take the kids to their ballet lessons in a neighboring town. I met the youngest, Kay, at the bus stop, but her siblings, M and N, weren't there. She told me their plan. They had left a second-story window open, and they were going to climb the 6-foot wooden fence, get onto the second-story balcony, crawl through the window, and watch TV all day instead of going to class. They knew I couldn't leave the 8-year-old alone in another town to go back and get them. This was the kind of thing I dealt with daily. They tested every limit, and whenever I tried to discipline them, their mom would come home, listen to their side, and immediately cancel any punishment I had given. I always ended up being the bad guy. By my second month, I was crying in the shower every night. With the terrible exchange rate and how expensive everything was in Germany, my €200 a month salary was nothing. I was burning through my personal savings just to buy small souvenirs on my 2 days off. I was so stressed and didn't know how to fix the dynamic. When I would call home, my family couldn't understand why I was so unhappy. Finally, I got the courage to tell Mrs. V that I wanted to leave, that the kids hated me, and this wasn't working. She yelled at me, saying we had a verbal contract for 6 months and I wasn't allowed to leave early. My parents didn't grasp the level of stress I was under. Things had gotten so bad that I started skipping meals, eating only one small meal a day because I was terrified of not having enough money to buy a train ticket and get out of there if it came to that. I felt completely trapped. I didn't speak German, and I didn't know you could translate web pages, so I thought I couldn't even book a flight home on my own. Miraculously, my tourist visa was not approved for an extension. They had told me to get a tourist visa instead of a proper au pair visa, likely because our arrangement was illegal due to the low pay, another red flag I had missed. At the 3-month mark, Mr. V came home for the first time. He tried to be my best friend, doing everything he could to convince me to stay. Because of my past trauma, I am very easily swayed by older men's opinions. He tried to act like a father figure, and when that didn't work, he tried something else that I couldn't put my finger on, but it felt very unnatural and manipulative. It scared me just enough to finally stand up for myself. I told them I was leaving, with or without their help. That's when he said, "You broke our contract. You have to pay us back the $1,000+ for the plane ticket I bought you, or I won't help you book a flight home." In a last-ditch effort, Mrs. V added, "Are you sure your parents will even let you come back? That's a lot of money to spend." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "It's my own money that I earned from my job before I came here." The takeaway is that not all horror stories involve monsters and ghosts. You can be just as traumatized by trusting the wrong people. I walked away from that experience with deep scars. I developed an unhealthy relationship with food from starving myself. I couldn't work with kids for a long time. The psychological abuse and mind games made me distrust other women for years. And while I had dealt with anxiety before, I developed suicidal thoughts that have plagued my life ever since. It's been 9 years, and I'm still in therapy, working through the trauma from those 3 months of hell. Be careful who you trust. I need to give a serious warning for violence and graphic descriptions in this story. I'm a guy from the UK, and I'm 23 now, but I was 18 years old when this happened. For my 18th birthday, my parents had bought me tickets to see a singer I was a huge fan of. The plan was for all 3 of us, me, my mom, and my dad, to go together. The concert was in Manchester, which was a different city from where we lived, so we had booked a hotel for the night and planned to take the train there. Since it was a pop singer, my dad wasn't really interested in the show itself, so his plan was to stay at the hotel during the concert and then come pick my mom and me up from the arena when it was over. However, a week before the concert, our plans were disrupted. My sister, who was supposed to look after our family dog while we were away, announced that she and her family were going on vacation for that same week. My parents had known about her trip, but they thought it was happening at a later date. This meant that my dad had to stay home to take care of our dog. So, on the day of the concert, it was just my mom and me who traveled down to Manchester on the train. We spent a few hours exploring the city, checked into our hotel, and then walked to the concert arena. To get into the main part of the building, you had to walk through these long, wide, tunnel-like underpasses. These tunnels led into a large open foyer area where all the merchandise stands and food stalls were. I was expecting there to be a main entrance with heavy security before you could even get into this area, like in other concerts I've been to. But there wasn't. It felt strange and a little too open. I remember half jokingly, half seriously saying to my mom, "Wow, literally anyone could just walk in here." There were doors leading from the foyer into the actual concert hall, and they had staff checking bags and tickets there. But the bag check was a joke. I had a large tote bag full of merch I'd already bought, and when I opened it for the security guard, he just glanced at the t-shirt on top and waved me through. We got some food, and then we headed to our seats, which were pretty high up, maybe about 20 rows from the very back of the arena. The concert itself was amazing. I had wanted to see this artist live for about 8 years, and it was everything I had hoped it would be. Eventually, the show ended, and everyone started getting up from their seats to leave. I was walking down the steep steps towards the exit when suddenly we heard a massive echoing boom. It sounded like a huge piece of stage equipment had fallen over. For a split second, the entire arena went silent. Then, absolute chaos erupted. Screams filled the air, and people started running in every direction. That's when I heard a girl near me scream the word "gunshot." My heart plummeted into my stomach, and my instincts screamed at me to run back up, away from the exits. My mom shouted my name, and we both ended up standing on the walkway at the very back of the arena. My mind was racing, filled with news stories about mass shootings. I was imagining a gunman running through the crowd, and I thought to myself that I could hide behind the back row of seats and maybe he wouldn't see me. A man's voice came over the PA system, trying to be calm, saying, "There is no need to panic. Everybody is safe. Please leave in an orderly manner." The arena slowly started to clear out, but my mom and I stayed where we were, waiting for things to calm down. After some time, the arena was mostly empty, and we finally started to make our way down the steps toward the exit. I saw a girl on the lower seating level, lying on the ground, with a paramedic beside her. I think she must have been trampled in the initial stampede. My heart was still pounding, and I was still thinking that there was a real possibility I could die here. We finally got down to the exit doors. As we walked through them and out into the foyer, I saw a thin cloud of gray smoke hanging in the air, and there was a horrible, acrid smell. I looked to my left, and I saw a large, mangled piece of what was unmistakably a human torso. It was bloody, with no head or limbs. As I was staring at it in horror, a staff member rushed over and placed a white cloth over it. My mom saw it too. She gripped my arm so hard it hurt, and we started walking faster. A fire exit door was open, and staff were ushering us and a small group of other people outside. We finally got out into the night air. It must have been around 11 p.m. We were in a city we didn't know, and it was pitch black. We just knew we had to get as far away from the arena as possible. We turned a corner, and an ambulance sped right past us. We walked as fast as we could, our hearts still pounding. My mom called my dad and told him there had been an accident, but that we were safe. We eventually flagged down a taxi and got back to our hotel. As soon as we got into our room, we turned on the news. A bomb had been detonated in the foyer. People had died. We stayed up all night, watching the story unfold. I slept in the double bed with my mom, too panicked to be alone. I'd probably only got half an hour of sleep. My whole body was shaking. We could hear sirens wailing all night long. I was scrolling through Twitter, seeing missing people posters, seeing the event become world news. The next morning, we found out the full horror. A suicide bomber had detonated a nail bomb in the middle of the foyer, right below where my mom and I had been sitting, just as the concert was ending and the area was filling with people. 22 people were killed, many of them children and teenagers, and hundreds were injured. 4 of the people who died were from our home city. The mangled corpse I had seen on the ground was the bomber. The smoke was from his bomb. The horrible smell was the smell of burned explosives and human flesh. If the bomb had been any stronger, or if that monster had waited just a few minutes longer for the foyer to be even more crowded, we could have been killed. If my dad had come with us, he would have been standing in that exact spot in the foyer, waiting to pick us up. I truly believe that our dog, by needing him to stay home, saved my dad's life that night. It's been over 5 years now. For a long time after, my anxiety was through the roof. I probably had PTSD. I couldn't be in crowds. Any loud noise would make me jump. The world never felt safe again. If you want to know more, you can Google the Ariana Grande Manchester bombing. You never think something like that will happen to you. It's just something you see on the news. But it did happen, and it was real, and it was horrifying. I'm 24 years old now, but this happened 2 years ago when I was working at a gas station in a small, rural town in Pennsylvania. It was one of those places that was also a convenience store and had a small kitchen that made fried chicken and sandwiches. I worked the day shift, usually opening up in the morning and getting off around 4 p.m., which was perfect because it gave me time to go pick up my kids from daycare. For the most part, it was an easy job. My manager was usually in the small office right behind the front counter, so even when I was alone on the floor, I never felt completely isolated. One afternoon, it was a particularly slow day. I was leaning on the counter, just chatting with my manager when an older gentleman walked in. I greeted him with a standard hello and went back to my conversation. He was probably in his late 60s, with thin gray hair and tobacco-stained fingers. He went over to the fountain drink machine and started filling up a large cup. He then came up to the counter and started telling me a story about how he used to get free drinks from here all the time. He mentioned the woman who used to work my shift, an older lady who had worked there for years. I had heard about her. She had unfortunately passed away from cancer a few months before I started. As he was talking, I glanced over at my manager. She was giving me a look, one of those subtle, just give it to him so he'll leave expressions. I smiled politely at the man and told him the drink was on the house today. He thanked me and then went to sit at one of the small tables we had near the kitchen area. After he sat down, I asked my manager who he was. She told me she had only seen him once before in the entire year she had been working there. She said something about him just gave her the creeps. I shrugged it off, and a few minutes later, my manager left for the day. Now it was just me and the cook in the back. I started doing my usual closing duties, stocking the coolers, cleaning the coffee station, doing inventory. But the whole time, I could feel his eyes on me. No matter where I went in the store, he would follow me with his gaze. He started trying to make conversation with me, calling me sweetheart and sunshine in a way that made my skin crawl. He would get up from his table and walk over to whatever aisle I was in, getting uncomfortably close to me. I could smell stale alcohol and mothballs on him. At one point, I was stocking chips in a narrow aisle, and he came and stood right behind me, blocking my way out, just talking nonsense. I was getting really uncomfortable. To get away from him, I decided to go into the large walk-in cooler in the back to stock the drinks. It was my last big task before my replacement, Ashley, was due to arrive. I was in the cold air of the cooler for maybe 5 minutes when I heard the heavy door swing open behind me. I turned around, and there he was, standing in the doorway with a strange look on his face. I told him he wasn't allowed back here, that it was for employees only, and that he needed to leave the cooler. He just smiled and said he was sorry, that he just wanted to talk to me more, but he didn't move. He just stood there, blocking the only exit. My heart started to pound. My mind was racing with all the terrible things that could happen. Just as I was about to tell him again to get out, I heard the bell on the front door jingle. A moment later, my coworker Ashley walked into the back room. She took one look at me, trapped in the cooler with this creepy old man standing in the doorway, and she immediately understood the situation. Ashley was a no-nonsense kind of person. She walked right up to the man and, in a firm, loud voice, told him that he needed to leave me alone and get out of the store immediately, or she was calling the police. The man's face transformed. The creepy smile vanished and was replaced by a mask of pure rage. He started screaming at her, calling her all sorts of horrible names. I had never seen someone get so angry so fast. It was terrifying. But Ashley just stood there, completely unfazed, with her arms crossed, staring him down. He finally seemed to realize he wasn't going to win. He stormed out of the back room, and a moment later we heard the front door slam shut. I haven't seen him since. It may not sound like the scariest story, but just imagine being cornered by a strange man who is clearly not stable, with no idea what his real intentions are. I am so thankful that Ashley walked in when she did. It could have ended up a lot worse.